Welcome to Let's Talk with Dr. Robin. In this podcast, topics will be discussed that promote the daily management of life. While this information is meant to supplement your journey towards healthy emotional well-being, it is not intended to take the place of seeing a licensed mental health professional. I am Dr. Robin C. Wiley, a licensed clinical social worker with a private therapy practice in New Jersey. Thank you for joining today's conversation. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Let's Talk with Dr. Robin. I am Dr. Robin. So, and accompanying me, as usual, is Bryce, my producer. Hey, Bryce.
How you doing? How's everything?
Doing good. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's been a rough start to the school year, but I'm all right.
Okay. Yes. It's still a lot going on in our communities, in our country. Of course, we don't necessarily, we want to get to the point where we're doing this podcast weekly. But other commitments, of course, we're always, extra busy all the time. But today, when I thought about what I wanted to talk about today, because I always try to come up with topics that I think would be relevant to what's going on and something that I can bring to the audience.
Sure.
That will be sort of thought-provoking. Sure. Also.
Right. Sure.
I thought about the value, and that's the topic of today's podcast, is the value of making mistakes. And I say this because one of the things I encounter with, in the different circles that I'm in, and the different age groups that I work with, is there is a fear associated with making a mistake.
Right.
A significant fear. And that almost sometimes prevents us or can prevent some from actually making a decision.
Right.
And, I thought about this and I know we've been having some conversations about, different things that we have to make decisions about and where there might be different courses of action we can take. But there's often like this level of anxiety that's associated with, decision making.
Right.
Like there can be self-doubt. Mm-hmm. It's like, is this the right decision? Or these are all the options. And how do I know which one is the right option? Right. Weighing out all the possible consequences. And, we just fear making that wrong decision. Right. And I notice it with, and I try not to, I don't want to generalize, but I think, a lot of times with younger folks, when they have to make these life decisions, right, what they feel are life decisions, like, okay, what job should I have? What major should I have in college? What career should I go into? And it almost like puts them in a state of like, it almost freezes them.
Sure.
Where then it's hard for them to like actually make the decision when you have to make a decision one way or the other, because you don't really have a choice.
Right.
It's just like going into adulthood. It's like, going into adulthood is not really an option. So whether you want to do it or not,
it's coming.
You're going there, right? You're going there. And we've all been there. We've all been there.
The scary thing, yes, I think, for when they're young is that, they don't really want to make a decision because the fear is there. Mm-hmm. But one thing you can guarantee is that they don't want nobody else making the decision for them.
Right.
But then in a way they do.
Right.
So it's like a ball of confusion going on.
So it's almost like the supervisor who, when you go to that supervisor and you say, this is the situation that I'm faced with, and they put it back on you and say, well, what is it that you want to do?
Right.
But the person
right
is like, well, no, I want you to tell me what to do. Because a lot of times we want somebody to blame. We don't want to say we made the decision on our own. Right. If it don't work out, I want to be able to come back
and blame somebody.
Right. And say, well, wait a minute, you told me to do this.
Without realizing that if it doesn't work, that's part of that humbling process, right, or that maturation process.
And that's what I want to get into. So the thing is, let's unpack. I want to unpack like the whole idea of mistakes. Okay. The whole idea of mistakes. And like I said, the title for today is like the value of making mistakes.
Right. I got it.
And, because I really, I always like to use this, I guess that's the social worker in me, like the strengths perspective. Yeah, you know what I mean? And we need to see strength in making mistakes.
Right.
So, and I'm sure at this point, some folks are like, what? I make a mistake. That could be catastrophic, what have you. Right. So here's the thing. Mistakes are going to happen. That's inevitable. You're going to make mistakes. Nobody walks through life and every decision that we make is the best decision.
Right.
But there are some factors to consider with that. So one of those factors is how big is the mistake?
Right.
So, one of my little mottos is if you don't end up dead or in jail,
right,
then that mistake can't be that bad.
You'll be all right. Right.
You'll be okay. Right. Just make sure you're not making a decision that's going to put you in jail or take your life away.
Right.
Okay. Those are two big things.
That's right.
You have to consider what will the impact, what is the true impact of or consequence of that decision? Because one of the things that happens is it can be like a minor thing. And I know minor is a very subjective word. Sure. You know what I mean? Sure. But it could be a minor thing that you have to make a decision about. And we can make that a level 10. So if you think of 0 to 10, how big is this decision? 10 being catastrophic, 0 being really no impact. Right. We will make it a level 10 when it isn't really. Right. Like it's like, okay, what bottle of water do I want to drink today? Do I want this one or that one? And then I make this like I create such anxiety within myself about which water to drink. Right.
Knowing that the bottom line is that you just need some water.
Yeah, you just need some water. Exactly. Right. So like for instance, and I'll bring that a little bit more to real life, like, okay, what job to take or what job am I going to have or what have you? A lot of times it can be more about having a job. Than what job it is, because you're not going to know if that decision to take that job or not is the best decision until you get in there. Right. So a lot of things we don't know if it's a good decision or a bad decision until you do it. Right. The problem is we don't necessarily do it, and so then we don't have the experience of the success or the mistake that we've made an error here. Right. And we haven't done anything.
And the thing about it is where and a lot of that is for us to think about and to kind of self-analyze so that we become self-aware, right? Right. But I would say when I hear you speak, I think of myself as a parent. And one of the things I just told my daughter this the other day, I've been afraid for you guys to fail. And I think about how my parents were, and they were similar. But they were a little bit more okay with me. Like, okay, you know what? Sometimes you have to fail in order to succeed. I mean, because it's almost like you have to, in order for you to win, you got to lose.
Mm-hmm. Right, because you realize something in that losing.
What it's going to take to win.
Because sometimes, and we'll get into this in a second, like with the patterns of, because the thing is there are opportunities in making a mistake. Right. And so we can spend too much thought time
about the mistake.
About like on the small, insignificant things that might be a mistake.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I bought this car. This car is not the best car, whatever. And granted, it's still getting you around, but you realize you made a bad decision.
Maybe you could have got you wanted the Benz or the Range or the Beamer, but maybe you were okay with just a Honda.
Right.
Or a little.
Which Hondas are good. Hyundai. But sometimes, I say this because a lot of times when we're younger, I think this really hits home because we don't know what's the best thing to do. We don't know, and we want to have that. We want to have like this ability to be like, I just want to know, like I want to know how this is going to work out. I want to know how it's going to go. Right. And there's no way of knowing that. There's no way of knowing that if you go to college and you major in this particular thing, that's going to be a lucrative career for you. There's no way of knowing that. You kind of have to just jump. You have to kind of just jump out on and have some faith in yourself and understand that everything is a process.
You know what you're talking about, like a process, because, I was saying again, as a 25-year-old or a 20-year-old or even a 30-year-old, I didn't make decisions thinking about my 65-year-old self.
Right. We don't start doing that until
I'm 45, and now I'm making decisions based upon my 65-year-old self. So that was a mistake, though, because if I had done that maybe at 25, 30, then
that retirement fund would be looking real good.
It'd be a little different. It's never too late.
But that's a good point. That's a good point that you're making, because then what happens is that now, so then you pass that knowledge on to your kids.
Right.
Or we pass that knowledge on to the young people who, we're part of their life. Right. Now, whether they listen or not, that's a whole other thing.
That's their process of making mistakes,
right,
and then learn,
right? Because a lot of times what happens is we as adults, and whether you're in a parenting role or even just a mentor role or what have you, a lot of times you're like, okay, well, I did this and I didn't, like credit, for instance, right? I think many of us, many people ruin their credit in college, because you get that, that free cup and that credit card and this $500 limit, and you go right out and spend it immediately, right? Not realizing you can't pay that. Right. You don't even know what the interest rate. You don't know anything about that. I mean, now there's probably more information than there was back in the day about credit and that kind of stuff. But so we know that. Right. So now we try to instill in the young people in our lives, like, look, don't go out here and get that credit card, or make sure you pay that on time, or we try to install it. However, what happens is that they may listen, they may take, because I think young people have some more access to financial responsibility sort of information. And they might take that and they might use that, and then they don't make the same mistake, or they do. Right. But I guarantee you, just like how many of us, we learn from that.
You learn from it. You got to go through that process. You have to, and I think sometimes we look for ways to escape it. But you can't escape it. You gotta go through it. Yeah. You gotta go through that process of making mistakes. You gotta go through, because that's the only way that you're ever gonna learn.
Right, and it's growth. And some mistakes are fixable. Like there are things that that they are fixable things. They are things that we can actually you can undo it. If you make a bad decision, like I said, if you don't, even people who do something, make a really bad mistake and go to jail. Right. You can still turn your life around. You can still fix it. You might but you're gonna have to pay the price. Right. There's a consequence. So, and the thing is, we want to minimize the consequences. Absolutely. We don't want to have consequences that, cause us more problems. Right. And so a lot of times we're not thinking about that when we make certain decisions.
Right. Now, when we think about mistakes, sometimes is it fair to say, because I guess if you made a mistake, that means what you've coming to acknowledge is that you've made a bad choice of something.
Which sometimes can be, we can be disappointed because we get caught up in that. Right. Disappointed in ourselves. Why did I make that decision? Right. I knew I shouldn't have done that. People were telling me I should. So we do all of this. And that's why I said like the self-doubt comes in, and then we second guess ourselves maybe going forward. Right. However, sometimes it is okay to take time to, to assess. Self-assessment, self-awareness, all those things of like, okay, this is something that I've done, that I've made a decision, and what can I learn from this? A lot of times when we make a mistake, we want to just move on. That's right. You know what I mean? We want to ignore it. We want to escape it, whatever. But it's beneficial to look at, well, you know what? When I made this decision, what was going on with me? Why did I make this decision? Right. And what are the opportunities in this for me to learn? Right. What did I find out about myself or what have you? And so then, because that'll help you not to make that mistake again, hopefully, or to see a pattern, if that's a pattern in the mistakes that you make, because that's key too. So the thing is, we have to pay attention. We have to listen. And you got to be, because some people, and many of us, all of us, we all make mistakes. So all of us, are we making, I guess the challenge is to reduce some of the same familiar mistakes that we do, right? Through the education that the mistakes is teaching us, right? But one of the things we have to remember is we do have to pay attention to, right? Because I think sometimes like I said, mistakes are inevitable, right? But they serve a purpose in our life. So you can't, like I said, you can't go through life and not make some mistakes. Right. It's just about the severity of those mistakes. And we need to take a moment to acknowledge that, okay, I made a mistake here, because sometimes that's hard too. Some folks are, we can be very stuck in the not taking the ownership of the decision that we made and the consequence of that decision. Because ultimately, especially when it involves other people, like we can blame something on somebody else very easily. Right. But if Right. But if I was a part of that decision-making process, I need to take ownership of that.
I gotta look in the mirror. Look in the mirror too.
And then paying attention and then looking at that, the pattern. Is this something I do on a regular basis? I keep making the same mistake. So if that's the case, then that's where you might need some intervention. You might need to do some things differently next time or slow down. Because sometimes the mistakes we made are because we are being a bit impulsive.
Emotional.
Right.
Emotions. And that's what it is. Like, one of the biggest things that, one of the biggest misconceptions, I think, is that people saying, oh, well, I'm could do what makes me happy. I gotta, so then all your decisions are based on what you feel is going to make you happy, not what you need to do in order to get to a happy place. But you think that this decision is going to make you happy. Then you're constantly chasing that decision.
Right. Well, it's that idea of if I just had this.
Right.
If I just had this, if this were happening, whatever, and you can fill in the blank on that. Like a lot of people feel like it's the next job, it's the next relationship, it's the next trip, it's the amount of money they need to make. It's all, then this will make life better and this will make me happy. And so we kind of need to, I don't want to say throw that out the window, but in a sense, because happiness does not come from external things, it's an internal development and process.
That's constantly happening.
Yes, that's not just one thing. And that's why, the proof of that is when you see people who are very wealthy. And are still not happy. So they have everything. Like you see people who literally, we have famous people who have literally had everything at their fingertips. And they did not want to be in this world. They still suffer from significant emotional situations, consequences, concerns, and a lot of times, they end up not wanting to be here and they make that happen. So
it's like perspective. That's really what it is. Happiness is like a perspective. And to a certain extent.
It's very much related to how you perceive things. Yes. But how you look at something, and I'm not saying you have to be pie in the sky about things because that's not always the way we need to go either. Because I'm always I can be a little concerned about those folks who are always like, everything's just great and everything's rosy. Because to me, that person may actually not be always acknowledging the truth and stuff. Some things are horrible. Some things are miserable. Some things that have happened are very bad things. So we need to acknowledge that, but we don't need to stay stuck in it. And we don't need to let it define how we view our own happiness, because happiness is really different for different people.
Because it's perspective driven. What are some things, what makes me happy is different than what might make the next person happy. So next person might need to have this or have this or have this and have this to say, hey, I'm happy. As opposed to, like, there's some people that need to have expensive things and, the next latest and greatest thing to be happy. As opposed to, let's say myself, I'm just happy if my kids wake up. Like, that's already a state of happiness I'm in already. You know what I'm saying? And then now I can add to it. But if I don't have all these next, latest, greatest things, I'm still at a place of happiness because my kids are healthy. I'm going forward. I'm employed. You know what I'm saying? So it depends.
So it's gratitude. It's gratitude, right? And I don't mean to say that, okay, because when I say happiness is an internal development, because it is. It's something that you have to work on. Happiness doesn't just happen. Even when you see, little small children, like, they have moments of happiness, but they also have moments of sadness. Like they run the range of emotions.
That's right.
And so, but the other part of this is having things in your life that don't establish your happiness, but that foster the happiness and contribute to. So that's the thing. It's to have that. So people in your life that contribute to your happiness, not take away from. They deposit, not withdraw. You know what I mean? And I'm not saying like all the time that's the case, but ultimately, because if you think about relationships, if you're with someone and you're like, well, this person, when we try to establish that kind of like expectation, this person makes me happy. This person, creates my happiness. What happens when that person goes away? Or what happens when that job, if you're like, oh, this job is my happiness. You don't want to give it an absolute, like, Because if that goes away, which inevitably things like that happen,
sure,
people go away.
Right.
People, maybe not intentionally, jobs don't always pan out.
Right.
Situations, if you put all your happiness tickets in a car that you have, and then that car is no longer working, does that mean that you can no longer be happy? So that's what kind of really reinforces the idea of we have to create happiness within us.
Ourselves.
And the thing is, even to get kind of just, bring this back to, create that bridge with mistakes.
Right.
A mistake should not hopefully determine, our emotional state. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it can take us off of our platform for a little bit. It can throw us off a little bit, especially depending on the severity of the mistake. Sure. However, but if we look at mistakes as we're going to make mistakes, they're inevitable, then it almost creates like less of a significance with the mistake.
Right. Sometimes the mistake, I think when people get caught up or they beat themselves up because they don't realize that mistakes are part of the journey.
Right,
they're
they
part
have to
of the
be.
process.
They have to be.
Like, I give it. Like, I always think about my kids, right? So I think about my journey too. But I think about my kids, especially my son. My son, he wants to be, good at basketball, or whatever. So he's been training, but sometimes you don't get the results that you need. So then that doubt starts creeping in.
And sometimes we don't want to continue. We don't want to continue with the process.
But that doubt is part of the process because you have to be able to defeat that.
Right.
You have to be able to persevere through your mistakes and know that the mistakes, distractions, or whatever, however you want to size it up, it's going to happen. It's all part of the process.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And that's the key is that, I think it's, it's part for us to accept that we are all on a journey, whether we might veer off on occasion because that's what happens. You know what I mean? We're on a journey and we decide to, I'm gonna make a left here, and maybe that was a bad move. You make a wrong turn, and you got to come back to the original road that you were on.
Right.
And that's about mistakes. Sometimes there is a mistake. But the idea is that, and mistakes happen. You think about this. Mistakes happen from the time that we're able to know that we shouldn't do something. Right. So even like a toddler. They make mistakes. They pick up something, they touch something that they weren't supposed to do, and then there's a consequence. So mistakes have always been happening in our lives.
Right.
It's just that sometimes we have a safety net there to catch us.
Right.
And hopefully we learn from that.
Sure.
But then other times it's time for us to go out on our own.
Right. And
we still have to make decisions.
I always say, like, one of the biggest mistakes that I've ever made is not valuing jobs, I'll say. You know what I'm saying? When I was younger, it was like, I get a job, ain't nothing. You know what I'm saying? So then I wouldn't approach the job in the right manner. Mm-hmm. But then once you lose the job and then, you make the mistake of having that perspective, then you go through now on the residual effect, the consequences is that, well, you know what, you might be facing a few evictions, you're not paying your rent, you can't afford car insurance, you can't afford all these things. So you remember now as
the importance of a job.
When I'm working now and I'm doing my thing, and people might have different ways of viewing different jobs. I'm always clear when it comes to me and how I look at a job, because I remember the mistakes that I made previously.
So that's the thing. So the mistake, the lesson from the mistake sets an imprint on you.
So you gotta have the mistakes.
Right.
You gotta have it.
You gotta have the mistakes. And unfortunately, a lot of times people want to go through life and they're like, well, I don't want to make any mistakes. It's like, but that's unrealistic because if you don't make any mistakes, you won't learn. And it's impossible to just not make a mistake. That's what I say. You just don't want to keep, the issue is you don't want to keep making the same mistakes over and over again. You don't want to keep making the same, maybe poor decision over and over again. And so, because that's where you realize, okay, there's a pattern there. And if you realize it, because sometimes people don't realize there's a pattern there. And that's where you want to reel yourself in.
But that's when you want to, and I can't remember, we were talking about it on camera or off camera, but that's where you want to have those quality individuals to be able to give you truth.
Right. A different perspective. Maybe a different perspective. Or to say, this is
love,
what's
though.
And sometimes it should, sometimes that is your therapist.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
That sometimes that could be the person you talk to every week where you're telling them, because that's part of the work that therapists do, is we do notice those patterns with folks. When you've been talking to somebody and you hear these things and you start to assess, we do hear and we do kind of assess for and check for those patterns.
That's right.
Although what happens is sometimes people just aren't ready to hear that. So that's a whole other podcast. Because you also have to be open to
receiving it.
Yeah, receiving the information, whether that's from a friend, whomever.
Right.
And maybe you're not ready today, maybe you'll be ready tomorrow. But I just felt like today was a good day to talk about, when we whatever the mistakes that we may have made in the past or we may make in the future. Right. There's a value in that. And respect that value and understand that, again, mistakes are inevitable. It's going to happen. Just try to be mindful of it and try to learn from those mistakes, learn those lessons, pay attention. I think now just hearing you talk and just to add to this, I think that the mistakes are so critical that it teaches us humility, because that's the only way that we can learn from them, is if we become in a humble state to learn from those mistakes. If we're not humble, then we'll never learn from them. Well, right. And that goes back to if we blame others or if we feel like, we just don't take ownership of the mistakes. Right. So that can be an issue too. So but that's it for today. Okay. Kind of a short and sweet, just to give you a little something until next time. Yeah. So just remember, like I said, mistakes, there's value. There's value in making mistakes. Until next time, be well, be great, and be you.